Summer 1982, Chelyabinsk, Soviet Union.
В Соединенных Штатах президент Рейган вновь требует увеличения военных расходов, направляя миллиарды.
Документ, разрешающий предъявить.
Ну что ж, после разговоров о политике, хоть погода сегодня рано.
Хорошо, участок 05. Идите прямо, потом поверните.
This is the Chelyabinsk Natural Gas Processing Unit, and while the Soviet emergency teams scramble to get control of the chaos, a satellite watches silently from orbit. It belongs to the American CIA, who are responsible for the explosion by planting a virus into the Soviets' pipeline software. The attack marked the beginning of a new digital front in the Cold War, but while both the U.S. and Soviets began the race for cyber supremacy, a different type of battle was happening in Western Germany. There, a group of young Germans were fighting with their weed dealer, and after getting what they actually paid for, they fire up both their joints and their PCs. They're part of the first generation of hackers, and are currently having fun infiltrating random systems and devices. However, what they don't know is that pretty soon, they will also be involved in the Cold War, specifically in a massive international hacking conspiracy, one that involves money, drugs, spies, and a murder mystery that remains unsolved to this date. This is the story of the KGB hackers, the first cyber spies in history. This video is sponsored by NordPass, but more on that later on. 1985, Hanover, West Germany. It's around 10 p.m. when a group of German computer enthusiasts come together in a scene restaurant called Spectacle and Sesame. The group is made of a bunch of hackers, but the following story mainly revolves around Karl Koch, alias Hagbard, a 19-year-old pothead and conspiracy theorist, Markus Hess, alias Umrel, a 25-year-old physics student, and Hans Heinrich Hubner, aka Pengu, a 17-year-old from Berlin. The three are big fans of the Chaos Computer Club, a German hacker association that got famous by exploiting a bank in an incredible way. They managed to steal 130,000 German mark, or about $100,000 US adjusted for inflation, by hacking into an account of the Sparkasse Bank and using it to load their BTX site, which was basically a pre-internet online service operating via telephone lines. Either way, Karl Koch is convinced that they can also pull off a move like that. However, right now, the rest of the group just wanted to party. And at the end of a turbulent night full of alcohol, the trio create their own unofficial hacking group, and with it, start a new era for the city's hackers. Mid-1985, Hanover, West Germany. Over the next few days, the three begin to hack everything they can get their hands on. German universities, U.S. military facilities, and even the European Organizer for Nuclear Research, otherwise known as CERN. There was just one problem. They weren't making any money. But this was about to change. Mid-1985, Hanover, West Germany. The three hackers are once again at their group's headquarters, the now so-called Computer Stammtisch table at their favorite restaurant. However, this time it's not to celebrate, but to add a recruit to their team. The prospect is a man called Dirk Otto Berzinski, aka Dob, a 25-year-old computer specialist motivated by the group's opposition to government surveillance, and, of course, the adrenaline rush from hacking the biggest institutions. But while West Germany is going through a liberal cyber rebellion against authoritarian ideas, East Germany is the complete opposite. It was the most extreme surveillance state in the world at the time, and especially strict in East Berlin. Both the East German secret police, known as the Stasi, and the Soviet intelligence services were constantly spying on their own populations and suppressing any ideas of personal freedom. It went so far that for every 7 East German citizens, at least one of them was a secret Stasi informant. However, both the Stasi and the Soviet intelligence agencies were not only surveilling their own people, they were also closely monitoring the West. And as interest in the emerging hacker underground grew, so did their concern. A concern that culminated when a CIA-planted software program triggered a massive explosion in a Siberian gas pipeline, thus marking the start of a new type of warfare in the digital realm. This led Nikolai Tikhonov, one of the highest-ranking Soviet statesmen, to build up the KGB's capacity for telecommunication-related warfare. This included the establishment of a digital defense division within the KGB's 8th Directorate, as well as the creation of a specialized school for digital spies in the 1st Directorate. The students there didn't just learn programming skills, they were also trained in espionage tactics and networking skills. And right in the back of this class was a young Russian man called Sergei, and even though he didn't know it yet, he was going to be part of one of the most controversial cyber espionage cases the world had ever seen. Late 1985, Hanover, West Germany. This is Peter Karl, a 30-year-old man from Hanover, and he's just been fired from one of the city's biggest casinos. The casino was going through a rough time, with the owner allegedly using profits to gamble and losing most of it in other casinos. The story would turn into an entire scandal a few years later, but right now, the main focus is on Peter Karl. He's currently sitting on a bench. He knows that he's pretty much broke and ponders on what to do next. That's when he remembers that one of his good friends had been talking about something called hacking. That friend was Dirk Otto Berzinski, aka Dob. And after the latter explained what hacking actually is, Peter proposes an idea so that both Dob and his team of hackers can make money. He explains that he's got connections to businessmen in the East, and they'd probably love to buy secret information. Dob thinks the proposal is interesting, and after a short consideration, agrees to reach out to the rest of the hacking group, all of whom agree to Peter's idea. There was just one problem. Nobody knew who exactly the buyer would be, at least not for now.
Уважаемые пассажиры, наш самолет прибудет в Берлин через 2 часа.
Late 1985, Munich, West Germany. It's late at night in German intelligence service, BND headquarters, and the higher-ups of the agency have come together. The reason for the meeting is the rising popularity of the hacking scene, the dangers this could cause, and the unchecked behavior of the Chaos Computer Club. It was a serious concern, and even more because at this time, ARPANET, a precursor to the modern internet, had been connected from the U.S. to the rest of the world. However, this version of ARPANET allowed anyone with the right credentials to access both research and military systems that were connected to the network. This openness, while initially beneficial for collaboration, became a weakness that hackers began to exploit, and thus turned the German hacker scene into a major risk factor. Either way, a BND official called Christian Stussel, who was a computer expert himself, explained that they needed to do 2 things. First of all, keep the German hackers in check, and, if plausible, use them for their own intelligence benefits. Stussel's superiors liked the idea, and with the help of BND Director Eberhard Blum, Stussel and a few other BND members are tasked with surveillance of hackers under an operation codenamed Project Rahab, something that will play a major role in understanding future events. March 14, 1986, Hanover, West Germany. It's a rainy night in Hanover, and the group is meeting at Karl Koch's apartment. They're chugging beers, passing joints, and telling awful jokes. But a few hours into the night, Peter Karl suddenly tells everyone to quiet down. He's got important news. He says he's found a way to turn their hacking skills into money, and a lot of it. Apparently, Peter had contacted someone in the East and was told that the Soviets had serious embargo issues. This meant that they were buying everything they could, information on new tech, weapons, and even simple memos. And they were paying well. The group quickly realizes where Peter's going with this. He wants to sell their stolen info not to Eastern businessmen, but directly to the Soviet government itself. This announcement was obviously unexpected. However, money is money, and because all of them needed some, they agree to Peter's proposal. Furthermore, they make the case that, to keep a lasting peace, both the East and the West should have the same levels of tech. Basically, they thought that they could contribute to worldwide peace by leveling the technological playing field. There was just one tiny issue. Peter Karl's contact told him that, for this to go down, someone would have to talk to the KGB directly, and that meant that one of them would need to cross the border, straight into the heart of East Germany's surveillance state. Mid-1986, East Berlin border. It's early in the morning, and a car from Hanover is waiting at the Heinrich-Heine-Straße crossing, a border checkpoint between East and West Berlin. Inside sits Peter Karl. He really doesn't want to be there, but since it was his idea, the group insisted he be the one to talk to the KGB. Everything is gray. Massive concrete walls flank the checkpoint, armed guards patrol the street, and just when Peter looks up at one of the guards in a fortified tower, the traffic barrier opens. He slowly drives into the control area. And just when he stops, one of the East German border officers orders him to exit the car. The officer pats him down and asks for his documents. At the same time, another officer uses a mirror to check underneath the vehicle. Peter is incredibly nervous. He has stolen documents on floppy disks hidden in the car, and if they're found, he'll be in serious trouble. Either way, while Peter shows the first guard his documents, the second soldier suddenly decides to inspect the inside of the vehicle. But luckily for Peter, he doesn't find anything suspicious and gives his colleague the okay. Peter gets back into his car and drives into East Berlin. He's overcome the first obstacle, but the second one will be just as hard. He drives to the Soviet Trade Mission, a known hotspot for undercover KGB agents. There, he simply walks through the front door and naively asks the receptionist about the person he's supposed to meet. The receptionist, however, has no idea what he's talking about and leaves. A few minutes later, a tall, suited man appears. The man is none other than Sergei, one of the new KGB specialists in cyber-related topics. About 180 miles away, the gang is smoking pot at Koch's apartment. Everyone is nervous and nobody is talking. It's really late and everyone is worried when suddenly, it's Peter Karl. When Peter enters the apartment, he walks through a room full of smoke, slowly takes out an envelope, and throws it on the table. Inside are about 20,000 mark, which would be about $23,000 US today. The group erupts. Their plan had worked and money was finally flowing. However, there was one catch. The last thing in the envelope was a strange list. You see, Sergei had explained to Peter that he needed better intel and made a list of stuff they should search for. This list included a bunch of different bounties. For example, a unique source code would be bought for 25,000 mark, compilers for 5,000 mark, and so on. Basically, the Soviets gave Peter a shopping list, and now it was all up to the hackers. They could finally use their abilities to make money. And that's exactly what they did. Koch and his gang lived in a world of secrets, selling stolen data from the west to the east, always looking over their shoulders. Karl knew better than most that the real danger isn't just what you know, but who else gets access to it. Today, the battlefield isn't the Cold War, it's your login screen. That's where today's sponsor, NordPass, comes in. It's a password manager designed to keep your organization's data safe, even when you're sharing it across teams. You can easily generate strong passwords, store them in a safe place, and share these credentials with anyone that might need them. Also, you can manage who has access to what and instantly revoke it when someone leaves your organization or business, all without exposing sensitive credentials. And with features like dark web breach monitoring, you can get alerted if your credentials appear in a data leak. Zero-knowledge architecture ensures that no one else, not even NordPass, can access your company credentials. Encryption and time-limited sharing. You stay in control, without any paranoia. Right now, you can get 20% off at nordpass.com/thinker using code THINKER. That's nordpass.com/thinker, code THINKER. Stay protected, because history shows us what happens when secrets fall into the wrong hands. August 1986, California, United States. This is Clifford Stoll, an astronomer working at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory. He's been talking about his computer skills and got himself transferred to the lab's computer center, something he really isn't happy about. Suddenly, Dave, one of his colleagues, walks into his office. Apparently, something was wrong with the lab's computer usage accounting software. You see, at that time, the lab was charging each scientist for their time of computer usage, and the bill for the last month's usage had a mistake in it. For whatever reason, the bill was $2,387.75, but only $2,387 had been paid. 75 cents were missing, and given that the accounting software calculated usage to the hundredth of a penny, this wasn't a glitch. Stoll is curious about what's happening and thinks that somebody is simply paying less than he should. He tells Dave that he'll look into it and everything looks fine. That is, until he reaches the newest user. Someone called Hunter used the lab's computers for a time amounting to the missing 75 cents, but his account didn't have a valid billing address, and traces of his activity had been wiped from the system. Something weird was going on with this account, but Stoll thinks it's a prank, and after monitoring it for a few days, simply deletes the user. But this isn't where the mystery ends. A few weeks later, he receives a message from the Naval Research Lab in Maryland. Apparently, someone from Stoll's lab had tried to break into their systems, and the user in question was someone called Joe Sventek, a respected computer scientist and Unix systems expert. And this connection attempt would have made sense. There was just one problem. Joe Sventek, the owner of that account, was in Cambridge, England. Stoll, now slowly realizing what's going on, checks the accounts logs, and just like Hunter, the activity logs had been deleted. The only place where its activity was still saved was in the lab's custom computer usage system, which meant that whoever was using the account didn't know about it, and thus was most likely an intruder. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, Karl Koch, Markus Hess, and the other hackers were partying. They've been making a good amount of money and weren't really saving any of it. Drugs, women, parties, they were having the time of their life, all while chasing the high of infiltrating the most secure systems in the West. However, for one of them, things started to go too far. Karl Koch found himself falling into the void of addiction, specifically with LSD and cocaine, and even though nobody knew it yet, this would have serious consequences down the road. But back to Clifford Stoll. He's been observing the hacker, writing down what he does every day. But one day, he notices that the hacker had given himself all privileges. He'd become an admin with absolute control in the lab system. And this was the final straw for Stoll. He picks up the phone and calls the FBI. But on the other end, the agents, probably not understanding what he's talking about, simply brush him off. Next, Stoll contacts the CIA, who also ignore him. And so do the NSA, DOJ, and all other governmental agencies.
Hello? Are you still there?
Mark, you still talking to the computer freak?
Yeah, the nutjob won't shut up about his machines.
This meant that there was only one possible next move. He had to catch the hacker on his own. late 1986, Hanover, West Germany. It's midnight when Markus Hess, aka Ermel, gets ready to search for sellable information, and usually he connects from his home setup to the University of Bremen, and from there he tries to infiltrate his victims' systems. However, today is different. The University of Bremen shut down its networks for Christmas, so he decides to attack systems directly from his home connection. Unluckily for him, one of the places he infiltrates that night is the Berkeley lab, the only place where someone was actually waiting for him. On the other side of the planet, Stoll and his colleague Steve were watching Hess connect to their system. And today, they're ready. They had created a fake file which they named SDI, or Strategic Defense Initiative, and filled it with technical-looking text and fake reports to make it seem classified. But the important part of this was that because the file was so big, it would take a lot of time to download, and if the hacker fell for their honeypot, they would be able to track him down. And this is exactly what happened. While Hess downloads the file, the two Americans manage to find the hacker's data network identification code, a sort of country code for data networks during the 80s. And this time, the code indicates that the connection is coming from West Germany. Luckily for the two, Steve knew a man called Wolfgang Hoffmann, a manager at the German Bundespost, the country's agency responsible for telecommunications services in West Germany at the time. Steve asks Hoffmann to take a look at the full DNIC number to pinpoint the hacker's exact connection. A few hours later, Wolfgang replies, "The hacker is somewhere in the city of Hanover." The first digital honeypot in history was a complete success. But there was one massive problem. Hoffmann had tracked down Hess without any warrants, and this was, of course, illegal. This meant that once the authorities were informed about these events, everything up to that point would be put under serious scrutiny from the German justice system, and, as such, the famous German bureaucracy machine also makes its appearance. Interestingly, this machine made so much noise that a bunch of journalists working for NDR, one of the biggest German media networks, heard rumors about hacker spies in Hanover, and these two journalists would turn everything on its head. 1987, somewhere in West Germany. It's around 8 p.m., and Markus Hess is doing an interview at a radio station. In front of him are Axel Lersche and Bernd Scheunemann, two journalists working for NDR too. Both of them had heard the rumors of hackers from Hanover, and at one point during the program, one of them suddenly asks Hess an unexpected question.
Markus, es gibt Gerüchte über Hacker, die in Hannover leben und für die Sowjets arbeiten.
However, Hess quickly denies these claims, saying that, "I can't say anything more about it, except that I definitely did not work for the Russians, and that the suspicion is complete nonsense." Nonetheless, the two journalists could tell that Hess was lying, and realized that they had a massive story on their hands. A few hours later, they meet at Scheunemann's apartment and decide that they have to find out what Hess is doing, at all costs. Shortly after, they reach out to all of their contacts in the Hanover hacker scene. Someone had to know about Markus Hess and his group's spying attempts, and luckily for them, someone did.
Aber da gibt's noch ein Du. Da kann ich was arrangieren.
This is Johann Sperber, a teacher during the day and a cyber activist at night. He's highly connected in the Hanover computer scene and good friends with the two NDR journalists. He's currently drinking a beer and smoking some cigarettes with one of his acquaintances. And this companion is none other than Karl Koch. The two chat, and Koch reveals that he's been having a lot of issues sleeping. But even worse, he's been spending too much money and is in a terrible place right now. Sperber can clearly see that Koch is in a pretty bad state, and not only financially. Either way, he explains that he has an opportunity for him to make some quick cash, and all he had to do was meet up with the two NDR journalists. Koch hesitates for a second, but eventually agrees to Sperber's proposal. May 1988, Hamburg, West Germany. It's late at night, and Karl Koch, as well as Pengo, are both sitting in the living room of Scheunemann's apartment. In front of them are two IBM portable computers, as well as a camera. The two intrude into the Optimus database, which was none other than the U.S. Pentagon's database, a truly important archive of confidential information. During their intrusion, the journalists asked them for keywords, and the hackers would find any documents with these words and print them out. The two NDR writers were surprised with the abilities of the young men, and once the filming concluded, they knew that they had an insane story on their hands. But the two journalists weren't the only ones uncovering what Karl Koch was up to.
Hier ist das erste deutsche Fernsehen mit der Tagesschau.
Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Der Nationalitätenkonflikt im Süden der Sowjetunion spitzt sich weiter zu. Bei der Räumung des seit 2 Tagen besetzten Flughafens der armenischen Hauptstadt Jerewan...
Jede Kassette, jedes Protokoll. Keine Kopien, kein loses Gerede. Hey, wer ist das?
Nach Angaben des sowjetischen Regierungsdiensts wurden dabei 36 Personen verletzt.
Polizei, nicht bewegen!
Ein Aufruf armenischer Nationalisten zum Generalstreik wurde heute offenbar weiterverfolgt. So sollen alle Betriebe und Bestätigungen
Er ist nicht hier.
Luckily for the two journalists, the police didn't find the hacking tapes. However, the two got paranoid and decided to hide the tapes, in addition to a bunch of notes and documents pertaining to the KGB operation, in a safe deposit box at the Hamburg Central train station. This box, however, had to be refilled with a few coins every 48 hours, and as long as the two journalists were doing this before the time elapsed, the tapes were secure. Or so they thought. You see, it's unknown who exactly made the first mistake. Nonetheless, one of the two journalists, let's just assume it was Scheunemann, was supposed to keep the safe deposit box filled with coins. However, he had to leave for an emergency, and when he arrived at his destination, he tried to contact Lersha so that he could refill the safe deposit box. Lersha, however, didn't pick up his phone, and this is because at the same time Scheunemann left for his emergency, Lersha also left Hamburg. And since he expected Scheunemann to pay the box, he didn't alert his colleague. This meant that the box, full of hacking tapes, KGB information, and personal hacking notes, had now turned into a ticking time bomb. If neither of the two journalists paid in time, an inspector would remove the material and most likely contact the police.
Schnell, schnell.
He was too late, and in front of him were a bunch of police officers holding none other than his security box. All the tapes, documents, and even lists from Sergei. Even worse was that a few days before, Karl Koch handed himself to the police. He knew that the authorities were onto him, his friends had left him, and he was literally losing his mind due to his addictions. He had nothing left, and thought that the only way out was to request espionage amnesty. You see, West Germany was in a spy war with the East, and to attract defectors, created a legal espionage amnesty, which allowed spies to escape prosecution if they confessed before charges were filed. And Karl tried to use this to his favor. He turned himself in and agreed to testify if the charges against him were to be dropped, a move that would evolve into one of Germany's biggest judicial controversies to date. March 2nd, 1989. It's around 5 a.m. while a member of the German intelligence service is surveilling Markus Hess at his apartment. And today was going to be the last day. Markus Hess, Dirk Otto Berzinski, and Peter Karl were all arrested on the 2nd of March 1989, and thus marked the end of the first cyber spy ring in history. Interestingly, at the same time, the two journalists were fired from NDR, and their material was given to two other journalists who went on to complete their own documentary on the case. This may seem like a small detail for now, but keep it in mind. Either way, these arrests and firings mark the end of the hacking story. However, it also marks the beginning of one of Germany's biggest murder mysteries. These two men are agents from West German law enforcement, and even though the case is pretty much concluded, they're still meeting up with Karl for interrogation purposes. And this is where things get weird. These meetings apparently never ended for Koch, and during them, he was allegedly squeezed for information on the broader hacking scene. And all of this was after he was double-crossed by the West German Office for Constitutional Protection. You see, before Karl turned himself in, he had contact with a lawyer called Johann Schwen, someone that was going to help him with the process of amnesty. And this is where things get muddy. The lawyer claims that he had a meeting with the president of Hamburg's Office for Constitutional Protection, also known as BFV. There, the two talked about Koch's case, and the lawyer was assured that if Karl handed himself in and cooperated, any criminal proceedings against him would be ended. This, however, isn't what happened. Instead, West Germany's Federal Police Department immediately opened a criminal investigation into Koch, breaking their agreement with his lawyer. And from here, the situation gets really dark. The federal authorities began periodically interrogating Koch, which even took place at his home without any surveillance. For some of these interrogations, he was even sent to federal police outposts, where he allegedly spilled information on not only his group, but the entire German hacking community. All of this, of course, without informing his lawyer. Strangely though, during this time, Koch was also given a job at the Christian Democratic Union, or CDU, which was and still is one of the major political parties in Germany. But things get even weirder when we realize that at this time, the CDU was starting to secretly receive hidden donations from a wide range of companies to receive future political favors. One of these hidden donations came from Weirau GmbH & Co. at the end of 1989 and amounted to 1.1 million German mark. Another interesting person was Karl-Heinz Schreiber, a weapons dealer also beginning to talk to the CDU for future favors, something that would eventually culminate in privileges involving a weapons deal with Saudi Arabia. Either way, right when the CDU begins their secret deals, Karl starts working there. So now, for whatever reason, a conspiracy-obsessed ex-Soviet hacking spy is working at a major political party, which is itself involved in a massive web of corruption. All of this while being interviewed by unknown parties in the German intelligence service every few days. It's the middle of the day when a farmer is doing his daily land inspection. It's a nice and warm day, the sun is shining, and everything looks fine. However, just before reaching the opposite side of his land, he notices something weird. There is a massive and almost perfectly round circle of burnt trees and ground. And in the middle of it all, he finds a charcoaled body, almost completely unrecognizable, burnt down to the bones. About an hour later, the police arrive at the scene, and alongside the farmer, they can't explain one major thing. Why did the fire stop in such an unnatural way? You see, this was in the middle of the year. It was hot outside, and the farmer's field was full of litter and dry grass. Also, it hadn't rained in days. So why did the fire stop? And who even was this dead person? Nothing seemed to make sense, and as the investigation began, the authorities decided to search the surroundings, which led them to the first clue. a gasoline container probably used to set the person or area on fire. A few hours later, another police officer finds a dusty black Volkswagen. The officer quickly writes down the license plate and contacts headquarters to review the car's license plate. Apparently, the car was a company vehicle registered to the Hanover CDU, and the last person seen in it was Karl Koch, who had gone missing 9 days ago. The corpse was quickly identified as Koch. However, there was still one massive question. Why did he die? And also, who was responsible? These are questions that still have not been fully answered. The official cause of death is disputed, and to this day, multiple theories try to explain what really happened. But none of them have been able to answer what truly happened to Karl Koch.
Großflächenbrand. Bei so viel Laub würde sich der ganze Wald in Flammen auflösen. Deshalb ist auch meine Meinung, dass hier nachgeholfen wurde und das Feuer im Schach gehalten wurde.
To make these videos, we spent a lot of time and money creating 3D scenes and animations from scratch, and when people comment saying it's AI, we get a bit surprised. Eric, me, the voiceover artist, is also a real person, something we'd just like to clarify.